Hey guys, Tim Fraser from 5D Options back here one more time, and we're going to talk about more about the cloud now. So hopefully you can get some of my, we don't have too many shadows with the sunset going on, but hopefully you guys can appreciate the fact I do these videos in here in Sedona, and I do them for your benefit, inspiration of sunset. So closing thoughts for the day. Maybe it's worthwhile to think about these topics. So I'm going to cover, the last time I was here, I talked about the business drivers and some of the governance and controls that the cloud really brings forward, that you need to bring forward to really embrace a cloud strategy in the right way. So today I'm going to talk a little bit beyond just the initial discussion. So let's just assume for a second that you guys have a cloud strategy and you have made a decision to go forward in the cloud. Now, there's several choices in this area, and I'm going to talk a little bit about cloud strategy in the context of both infrastructure as a service as well as software as a service. I'm sorry. Let me say that again. Infrastructure as a service and platform as a service. So this is not where you basically just do a turnkey and turn on a service in a vendor's cloud environment. This is where you're trying to make an investment in your infrastructure, migrate either applications or consider moving applications or workload from your data center into a cloud environment. Now, you may choose to not go 100% cloud. You may choose only to move certain types of workloads. So I'm going to cover some of the thinking process that you got to go through to be able to truly take advantage of what is best in the cloud at the early stages and the maturity that you're going to need to be able to go to the next level. So I've got some notes here as usual. I want to just make sure I stay on track on some of my key topics. And I'd like to give credit to Amazon at the reInvent in 2016. There's some materials, and this is publicly available information, quite frankly, and I've been through this process. So having been through this, it takes a different meaning for me about having to give advice around what is a migration strategy look like. So I actually would like to describe this as a cloud enablement service. So if you're thinking about thinking about moving some of your workload from your data center into a cloud and take advantage of cloud, or moving whole scale into the cloud, you're going to go through similar processes as what I'm going to cover here. So the very first step you go through the process is cloud strategy, and I think I covered a little bit about the business drivers and all that, so I'm not going to go over that again. But the next thing you need to look at is sort of your workload assessment, that in terms of what is your workload profile. Do you have a heavy data workload, transactional workload, analytics workload? Do you have just raw data that needs to be crunched? Looking at the workload that you have and which of those workload profiles are best suited for the cloud journey. And you may be thinking about that, about whole scale moving things, but there may be some processes of rationalizing what is the highest risk in terms of your data or your application workload before you go there. So you need to do some workload assessment. So think about scale out versus scale up in terms of your applications. The applications that can horizontally scale out are probably better suited to go into a cloud environment, a cloud ecosystem. And so you might want to rationalize some of that. So your first thing is to look at, once you get past the cloud strategy and you start looking at the governance, which I also covered last time, and I'll just recap. So it's around governance, around security, provisioning, workflow, and some of your policies and procedures around how to maximize and how to use the cloud services. And a lot of my languaging is around Amazon, around AWS, but quite frankly, I want you to know that Amazon is just a good benchmark for languaging because they've created such advanced capabilities. And some of what I'm going to talk about could also apply to other cloud services like Google Cloud or Oracle Cloud or Azure. But I tend to favor Amazon because I've personally experienced that, and I'm going to talk about what I know, okay? And I've been through some Azure conversions as well. So if you want me to go there, I'll go there. So put some thumbs up, or if you want to hear about other cloud types. Ecosystems, but that doesn't matter at this stage of the conversation. So governance is clear. Once you get past governance, you look at those, like I said, the workload profiles, and what are the workloads that really are best suited for cloud. Just to understand the answer to that question, you're going to need to go through some soul searching around the placement of your data, the scale of your data, the application transaction workload mix. Is it real time? Is it OLTP? Is it data warehousing? Is it business ETL or data ETL? And is it business workflow? Are you positioned for transactional services through APIs, or are you kind of shoehorning a lot of your stuff? So looking at the application as well as the workload underneath, the workload profile for how the application is used. You may want, then you'll get to that point of rationalizing, okay, that's great. These are the workload profiles that work. And these are the applications that might fit in cloud. And looking at, like I said before, lifting and shifting some of your workload may not be the best suited approach. So take a look at that. If your applications are, like I said, designed so they can deploy horizontally in your data center, you can add capacity, you can remove capacity, maybe it's manually, maybe it's automated, but if you've got the applications that fit that model, they're resilient to application, to network, network topologies that are more elastic, so you can have virtual networks around you, or you've got specific network environments that the application can span, so defining access controls and security and all that can easily be modified. Then maybe that application is suited to go to the cloud as is, without doing any refactoring of the application. But in case it's not, then it might be useful to take a look at, do you rehost the application? Basically the first scenario I just covered, just pick it and move it. Do you replace it? Do you re-engineer it, or do you like integrate that into a cloud ecosystem, and you may have to refactor them? So there's a refactoring process you go through. So you may want to look at those application rationalization steps and understand not only what does this application do, but what does it connect to, and how, and if you start moving one application, do you have to move a lot of the application workloads with you? So that's your application rationalization process that you'll need to do. And when you really get down to it and you decide that you've got your workload figured out, you're gonna need to go through this whole process of setting up the environments, and at this stage you may actually hit an interesting dilemma a lot of companies are looking at, when they look at cloud, is going to an Amazon or Azure or Google or another cloud vendor may cause you to start stretching your workload across topologies. You may need to keep some of that workload in-house and some of that workload at the data center, and that creates that hybrid scenario of workload distribution across networks and across latency zones. So when you start looking at that, you may already be playing in a hybrid cloud environment. So if you can avoid it, and you can move self-contained workloads like websites that are maybe static content, or you've got some simple application, web and app tiers that may do some transaction caching and all that in content management. It's in a contained environment that you can reseed that through some of the data source. That might be a good place to look at some of those workloads first. But if you can't, and you got to bring your data with you, and you got to bring other systems with you, and you got to bring other applications with you, you got to have to draw that line someplace. And once you figure out where those boundaries are, what those demarcation points are for those applications, those workloads, that's when you start finding where those lines are and how you're going to start segmenting. And that's when you will end up having to go into the setup and the deployment process. So deployment through tools like templates, using standard guidelines and processes, maybe even standard images for what, if you've got a Windows environment, or you got a Linux environment, you got an Oracle environment, you may need to set up standard default templates. And you can use, in Amazon's language, you can use CloudFormation templates to be able to set up default configurations, not just of the server configuration, but the tools that it's taking with it and installing. So you may have some monitoring tools, you may have some log servers, so all the pieces that go into taking and building an operational ready workload is what you're going to set up in your template. And those templates can get reused to scale your application when you have a scaling event. Either scale up or scale down, so you can start making the application elastic and take advantage of the cloud resources in a way that makes sense. Now, when you go through this process, there'll be some deep dives into, which size instances do you want to use in Amazon, and how big are those instances. Those instance size choices can be financially limiting or financially constrained choices. So be careful about how you set up your environment, because you may want to start with really small instances. Don't overload it. Just because you had big workloads in the data center, you might not want to bring all that over. You might be better suited to take that workload and break it into smaller EC2 instances that allows you to use a cheaper system, see cheaper VMs and virtual containers, and use that first. And then as you start hitting some scale events, either thresholds on performance and all that, then have the ability to add more capacity by adding more horizontal scale, if your application can, obviously scale it that way. If it doesn't, you probably want to reconsider whether or not that application is well suited for the cloud. So, taking and building these sort of the ecosystem and setting up the environment, and then it's a process of migrating your workload, migrating your data, and then migrating your application, and then looking at doing a pilot project, doing an awareness program on management and on operational readiness around support. Does your team have the right skills to support and use the Amazon consoles or the cloud tools in a cloud environment? Using these tools in a way that allows you to rapidly provision and deprovision application workloads is going to become really, really important for you, because remember, you didn't go to the cloud just because you were going to save a couple of dollars on some VMs, or possibly, maybe it's a wash based on how you scale and size these things, but you're really doing it for other reasons. And go back to those key business principles around what are your key business drivers, and keep that in focus every step of the way. Otherwise, it's very easy to lose your track, because you may find yourself having a conversation with your security team and saying, hey, we're going to go to Amazon, but the security guys are going to say, well, no, you can't, because we don't believe that you can be secured. Well, the truth is, you're going to have to think about those pieces before you go into the deployment framework, and think about how the third-party tools you would bring with you to ensure security, ensure better visibility into your applications, into your workloads, access control lists, virtual firewalls, load balancers. There's lots of what I call technical mumbo jumbo at the technical root level that you'll need to think through, and those become standard templates that go into your deployment framework. Okay, so that's your deployment, your migration, and then your operational readiness. Are you ready to take on more workloads? Can you scale? Can you manage? Can you watch the cost controls of what the cloud is going to do? So you need to put some controls in place. Maybe use some third-party tools that allow you to see how you're spending your money. Are you spending the money for the VMs in the right way for the workload that you have? And you might want to tune and optimize that as you go forward. Don't just load and go and say, hey, we're in the cloud. Look what happened. Because then when you see your invoice, you might actually have a little bit of sticker shock if you're inappropriately using some of those VMs at the wrong scale and the wrong size. So you're going to do some tuning and optimization before you go. And that brings you into that operational runtime, which is really about cloud management. And as you go into management, it's like I said, monitoring, SLAs, metering, and billing. Those are the big things that you're going to want to look at that phase. So this is a really broad brush around. This is the life cycle of what it takes to go into a cloud ecosystem without really, without breaking the bank, and doing it in a risk-appropriate manner for that workload and that data that you're taking with you, so you understand how to manage this stuff before you jump all feet in and start taking everything with you. So that's what I have for now. I will cover some topics on hybrid cloud a little bit further, because I've discovered with a lot of my clients, they have this conversation with their vendors. They go, hey, we're going to go to the cloud. Then the reality check occurs. Well, this data can't go. Well, now what? We've got all these corporate systems that are entrenched in IT, in the data center, that you can't peel back right away. Which means you start stretching your network, and you start stretching your data across networks, and that's going to create some interesting challenges in terms of how you move that workload, and when do you draw that line. And when you start drawing those lines, what are the thinking? There are different operating models, about, do you then, start setting up APIs in the cloud or at the data center to bridge the stuff and create the right governance control points to be able to move data between sites. And of course, you got to think about the ugly thing that we all deal with is latency. How much latency can your applications support, can tolerate in terms of cloud movement, data movement across topologies between data centers, colo locations, and also the cloud. So on that note, I will leave you guys to ponder on these topics for now. I am going to do, so just a little bit of something. I'm going to do a couple of kind of podcast format interviews, and I think one is going to be recorded tonight, so it's possible I'm going to get a chance to get that out tonight. It's going to be about talking to somebody who has been through this private cloud journey, and we've had some interesting discussions with my colleagues and former colleagues about, you know, how do you convince your managers and your directors that you're going to use the cloud in an appropriate manner, and why is cloud different? If I had a workload here and a workload and a workload there, and let's just say pick VMware. If I had a VMware environment and I'm trying to move to Amazon, why is it different, and what would be the benefits? Because, you know, the conversation is usually, well, I can give you a VM, I can give you a VM, I can you know, give you a virtual machine in Amazon just as easily as I can give you in VMware, or vice versa. So why would you really go? And what are the thinking and the questions that are going to come up from your peers about, well, that's not going to work, you know, and you got to do all this and this in Amazon, and VMware does all this for you. So we're going to have a conversation on those key topics. There's some pretty heated conversations I've been in many times with companies that are entrenched in VMware, and you know, VMware is a great product. They've got the right place and mindset for a certain kind of size scale business. But when you're trying to scale into a different ecosystem like cloud, it may challenge your some of your cost models and operating models and ways of thinking, which goes back to think about whys. So I'm going to leave you on that one. Beautiful here in Sedona, Arizona. Some of these quantum tech tips from Sedona for you guys. If you got questions, please post them on this Facebook live page, or if it's a recording, just post them as well. I'm going to watch your messages and respond to them as well. So on that note, we'll catch you later on Quantum Tech Tips.